All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar Beis, the Schwarzbaum Family, for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this month in memory of Rabbi Aaron Schwarzbaum, Aharon Yosef ben Meir, Zichron Livracha, Leah Sol, in zechus of her daughter Ilana Bas Esther's successful surgery and complete refuah sheleima, for the safe return of all of our hostages and the success of our soldiers. Maia Hoffman, in memory of her father Reuven ben Emanuel, and on the merit of hatzlacha, health and joy for her entire family. Yoel Sara Kelman, in honor of the birth of their son, and in memory of Staff Sergeant David Sasson, and we dedicate our learning Le'ilui Nishma Staff Sergeant Nisim Kachlon. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the neshama slav and aliyah, the families in neshama, all of those who need refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Each and every one of our hostages should be returned, and our soldiers in Meretz Hashem should be successful. B'chol ma'aseh yadehem. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, some really incredible Gemara ahead of us. Let me just check that this is okay. Good. Some really incredible Gemara. So today's daf is Chav Test 29, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on 28b at the two dots. Tanra Banan. About 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Actually, no, let's do like this. 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the Mishnah. So I'll do the bottom of the page. Tanra Banan. Barishona hiskinu shehu omrim. Barishona omrim. Barishona. Start again. Tanra Banan. Barishona. Kol misha abdullah aveda. Anyone who lost an object, hayanosin simana benotla. So let's say the way it used to work in the good old days, you lost an object, and what would happen? You would come, show out. Well, the Gemara is obviously missing a part over here. In other words, someone would announce that they found an object, and they would make an item-specific announcement. I would show up, give a siman, they'd give me the object, shalom al Yisrael. Misharabu haraman. Well, so then what happened? There was a proliferation of dishonest individuals. So obviously, again, now it's interesting to note when exactly this occurred, like when this changed, what precipitated this change. The Gemara doesn't tell us. But Lamaisa, there was a proliferation of dishonest individuals. What was the halacha? It was fascinating. Hiskinu shiu omrim lo tseva havi edim delav ramai at. Rabbi said this is incredible. When there was a proliferation of dishonest people, so the rabbis changed the system. What was the system? So I found an object. I announced it, and Reuven shows up. And Reuven says, "Oh, that's my object. What's the halacha?" Said to Reuven, you have to bring witnesses that you are not a dishonest person. Now I will say, that seems absolutely impossible. In other words, to go ahead and prove that you're not something, would seem to be an incredibly difficult threshold to cross. So you have to bring witnesses that you are not dishonest. So the Gemara tells the story over here. So we'll say, by the way, tragically, what does that tell you? It's an interesting window into the societal realities that the Gemara was dealing with over here, where it's almost like the presumed status of an individual was that you're a Ramai. That's how prevalent apparently this dishonesty was in greater society. So you have to go ahead and bring witnesses that you're not a Ramai. Now, what does it mean to bring witnesses that you're not a rabbi? This one tells a story. It's an interesting story over here. The story of the father of Rav Papa. He lost a donkey. Someone found the donkey. So ultimately, again, apparently it was Rabbi Barafuna who found it, or the case was brought before Rabbi Barafuna. Amarle, and Rabbi Barafuna said to the father of Rav Papa, Zil Aisi Sadil Rav Ramayat, go bring witnesses that you are not dishonest. Vitol, and you can take your donkey. Azal Aisi Sahadi. So the father of Rav Papa went ahead and brought witnesses to Beis Din. So Rabbi Barafuna said to them, Amarlahu, Yidi Asan Be Diramahu. So Rabbi Barafuna phrased the question to them like this: do you guys know if this individual, the father of Rav Papa, is he dishonest? Amrulay in. The witnesses answered, yes. Okay, so the witnesses answered, yes, we know that he's dishonest. Amr lahu, ana rama. Amr lahu, ana rama, ana. So the father of Rav Papa was obviously a bit incredulous about this. He says, what? You're testifying that I'm a Ramai? Amrulay, no. Anan lav ramai at kamina. No. We meant to say you're not a ramai. You get confused. And I was going to say, Rashi points out over here, they were expecting a different question. In other words, they were saying to come to Beis Din, and they were expecting that this was a one question cross-examination. What was the one question? To the best of your knowledge, is the father of Rav Papa not a ramai? And they were expecting to say, yes. So the question was phrased a little bit differently. Do you know that he's a ramai? So they just said, yes. In other words, I will say they were coached, not in a bad way, not in a way to lie, but this was like a procedural thing. You bring, as well as say, by the way, it's also interesting, that's what it means to bring witnesses that you're not a ramai. In other words, witnesses show up in Beis Din. Beis Din says to the guy, to the best of your knowledge, is this guy a ramai? Right? And the witnesses say, no, that's it. So Amar Rav Huna, so now the shadow of course was, what do you do with this testimony? So Rav Huna said, Mistabra lo maisi inish chovasel and afshay. So Rav Huna says, no, we could attribute this to just human error, and they really meant to say no, but they thought they were answering a different question, because it wouldn't make sense that the father of Rav Papa would bring witnesses who would indict him, right? That wouldn't make sense. So therefore, again, the pashtus, we just attribute this to human error and we go forward. So I will say a really fascinating idea how halacha l'maisa the system changed. That whereas we went from a system of saying you show up, give your siman mufak and move forward. So l'maisa again afterwards there was this societal shift where you had to bring witnesses, essentially character witnesses. That's really what it is. You had to bring character witnesses who are able to testify that you're not a bad guy. Now, by the way, it's a pretty low threshold, right? That's it. They have to testify that you're not a rob, that you're not a dishonest individual. That's it. To the best of our ability, Plony is not dishonest. Then after that point, you can remember again, we're not dispensing with the siman, right? You still need the siman. You always need the siman in order to give back the object. But at least we need a character reference and the siman. Incredible. Mishnah. So the Gemara says, "Kol davar she'osev ha'ochel yaseh ha'ochel." So we'll say now another very interesting. We'll say I'll also just point out something amazing. If you remember again from the Mishnah said that a ramai, even if he gives a siman, you don't give him back the object. You don't give back the object. That's what the Mishnah said. That's why, again, and we'll say this is the full circle. That's why the Gemara said, you're right, when there was this proliferation of dishonest individuals, giving a siman is not enough. You need a character witness and a siman. So we'll say, it struck me so profoundly that here you have a guy, right? So let's just play this out. Right? So I find an object, I find the cloak. I find the cloak. Reuven comes along, and Reuven gives a siman that is a siman mufhak. Siman mufhak. On the middle of the cloak, the warp and the woof. We just haven't used that in a while, so I feel like I want to get that in, right? The warp and the woof, right? Go ahead and change something like really mufhak. Something really mufhak. So what's the halacha? The halacha, sorry, I appreciate the siman. You need to bring a character reference. Right? You need to bring a character reference, you are a ramai. Or, if you can't bring a character reference, that's it, I'm sorry, but he gave us siman mufhak. But you see something amazing, that in life, sometimes we do things that fundamentally change us. And even after we regret, and even after you want to walk it back, you can't. There are certain things that we do in this world that are simply irreversible. It's the Gemara Maseches Brachos that says that there are certain actions, Shalom Alech says, Mu'uvas lo yuchal liskon. That which is bent cannot be made straight. So the Gemara, which Shlomo seems to be saying that there are certain actions, we like to think that you could do tshuva for everything. So here's what's interesting. You can do tshuva for everything. But just because you could do tshuva for something does not mean that you could reverse engineer the actions. Does not mean that you could undo the realities you've created. So the Gemara gives an interesting example. The Gemara's example is, Zeh ha'amolid mamzer. The Gemara gives an interesting example. Person engages in an act of adultery. And that union produces a mamzer. A mamzer. I will say, can you do tshuva for adultery? Can you do tshuva for adultery? Sure. Of course. You can do tshuva for anything. You can do tshuva for adultery. You can't reverse the effects of your actions. And I will say, this is a tremendous dichotomy that exists within Yiddishkeit. I can do tshuva for anything. But just because you could do tshuva for something does not mean that you could go ahead and reverse the impact of your actions. There are times in life we do things, and those things cannot be walked back. Those realities, I could change myself, I can. But the realities still remain in this world. And that's the Mishnah teaching us. Reuven becomes a Ramai. God gave us a Mavot. You're a Ramai. You're a Ramai. Now, again, you could do tshuva becoming a Ramai. But the point the Mishnah is teaching me is, there are realities that we create that we can't walk back. And therefore, be careful with what you do. Think before you act. Because even though on a spiritual level, I can do tshuva, sometimes I can't undo the realities that I create. Such an overwhelming Gemara. Let's go back to Mishnah. Kol davar. Kol davar she'osu acha. Listen, sometimes we think to ourselves, this early in the morning is too early for deep lessons like this, right? I can't do deep lessons before like 9 a.m. and 5 cups of coffee, right? Once I hit that metric, I'm ready. I'm ready for heaviness. I don't say, but that's what it means to be a Yid. What it means to be a Yid is from the time you wake up in the morning until the time you go to sleep. It's real life all the time. Says the Mishnah. So we'll say, so now we come into some really interesting halachas over here. I find an object. So we'll say, let's now transition from our cloak to our sheep, right? Or to livestock, because that's where this is going to be most illustrated. So I find livestock. So we'll say, so now, okay, I have a mitzvah shavas aveda. I'm going to hold on to it. What's the problem? It costs money to maintain livestock. It costs money. So now the shaila is like, what do I do? So the Mishnah says, not a problem. Essentially, any item that has the ability to essentially self-sustain. So it has the ability to do work, and as a result of its work, ultimately again sustain itself, then you could keep up that process. Rashi says over here, if the object you find is something that can go ahead and sustain itself through its own actions, for example, a shar nachamar, right? So the shar nachamar, they could go ahead and work, and then ultimately, again, they could be sustained through the proceeds of their own work. So we'll say, so the idea over here is, you find an animal, or for that matter, any object, if the object can essentially support itself through its work, so allow itself to support its work. Allow it to support itself through its work. We'll say, what happens if you find something and it costs money to sustain it, and it can't go ahead and pay for itself through its own work? So yimacher. So we'll say the halacha is you could sell it. So now you sell it, and you essentially put the proceeds on the side, waiting for the owner to come and to claim it. Shneimar vashevosa lo. The pasuk says you shall return the lost object to the owner. Re'eh hich tishivenu lo. So we'll say the Mishnah explains that the halacha is you are supposed to see what is the best way to return this object to the owner. In other words, so the finder has some level of discretion as to how the best way to return the lost object to the owner is. So I'll say, so this is a very important halacha. So this teaches me, by the way, two things. If I find an ox, see, I'll say, you would have thought, or I would have thought, if you find an ox, what's the halacha? You kind of put the ox in the barn, leave it alone, feed it, take care of it until the owner comes. The problem is, that's going to be an expense for me. I'm obligated to perform a mitzvah. I'm not necessarily obligated to incur an expense with performing a mitzvah. So if I have an ox, I could rent it out, right? I could use it to plow, or I could use it to plow my own field. That's the halacha. And again, it generates income. That income could go ahead and sustain the ox itself. If I find something and it can't sustain itself, the halacha is sell it, and that way, again, I'm locking in, I'm securing the investment, so to speak, of the lost object, and then I'll give back the money to the owner. So the Gemara says, Maia Hoffman. So we'll say, let's say in a case where Allah said, I found an object and I sold it. What are my rights when it comes to the money? Rabbi Tarfon says, I, the finder, have the right to use the money. So I want to invest it. I want to do business with it. Obviously, I'm going to give it back to the owner when he claims his lost object, but I have some usage rights. Because I have usage rights, therefore, if they're lost, I am responsible to replace the money. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I have a right to sell the animal in order to go out and secure the investment, or secure the money, secure the object, financial value of the object. Once I sell that object, that money has to be set aside for the owner. And therefore, again, because I have no usage rights over the money, If the money is lost, I don't have responsibility for the lost funds. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Uli Olam. Here's what's interesting. In general, when you find an object, right? So am I obligated to just hold on to it and watch over it forever? They'll say, no, the truth is we already saw from the previous Mishnah, right? That's not the case, right? You have 3 regalim and a week afterwards. But the shayla over here is when it comes to livestock, I will say, if I'm finding an animal, so that's a long time to watch over someone else's animal. So the Gemara says, no. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, ad yud beis chodesh. You have 1 year, right? 1 year, right? 1 year is the max amount of time. So Tanya that supports this. Kol davar she'osav ha'ochel k'gon para v'chamar metabal b'hain ad yud beis chodesh mikan ve'ilech sam demeim umanichan. So we'll say the Brisa says as follows: anything that essentially self-supports, like a cow or like a donkey, which again you could put to work and there are proceeds from that work, so you hold on to it for a year. For a year. After that, ultimately again you assess the value of the animal, cash it out, right? Sell it and put the money on the side. When the owner comes and gives a simon for his animal, you give him back the money. So we'll say now, interestingly enough, this halacha is subjective, based on the type of animal we're talking about. Agalim usiyachin, right? So calves or young donkeys. Netapel bahan shlosha chadashim. You hold on to them for 3 months. Mikan ve'elech sham demehem umanichan. After that, you assess the value of the animal and sell it. So we'll say what you see over here is, remember again, older animals are more capable of working, therefore could self-sustain for longer. Younger animals, not as capable of working, so therefore only have to hold on to them for 3 months, then could sell them, hold on to the money. Avzin v'tarnagolin, geese and chickens. Metalba and shloshim yom. You have to deal with them for 30 days. Mikan ve'elech sam demeim umanichan. After that, you assess it and you sell, put the money on the side. Amar Nachman Bar Yitzchak tarnagolas kibehema Gaza. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says a hen is like a large animal. We'll say, why? What's the logic? Because a hen could self-sustain with eggs. Okay, so Tanya Nachman that supports this. Tarnagolas kibehema Gaza. If you have a hen or you have a large animal, metapal bahan shnei masar chodesh. Ultimately, again, you deal with them. Talba means you leave them as is for 12 months. After that, you go ahead and you assess their value, sell it, and hold on to the money for the owner. Again, if you have calves or young donkeys, geese and chickens, or for that matter, any item where the effort expended in caring for the animal is more than the animal actually generates. You involve yourself with them for 3 days. In other words, you take care of it for 3 days. After that, you go ahead and you evaluate. You evaluate the animal, sell it, and ultimately keep the money on the side for the owner when he claims. I think Gemara supposed to have a contradiction. Kashi agalanu siyachin, agalamu siyachin, avzin v'tarnagolama, avzin v'tarnagolama. We have a machlokes, a steer between the two brises. To which the Gemara says, no, agalamu siyachin, sorry, agalanu siyachin, agalamu siyachin lo kasha, han diraya baha dipitumo. One is talking about, again, small chickens and geese. One is talking about larger chickens and geese. Young donkeys and young calves. One is talking about, again, or I should say thin donkeys and thin calves. One is talking about larger donkeys and calves. In other words, Rabbi say one needs more teeple, one needs less teeple. There's also no contradiction between the case of the two statements of the geese and the chicken. Ha beravravi, ha bezutri. Again, I will say one is talking about larger ones, one is talking about smaller ones. Okay, good. So the Gemara says as follows. No, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I'm sorry. I will say the case of the agal and the siyachin is not large and small. One is talking about grazing. I'm sorry. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says hadiraya the petuma hadik tani shlosha chadashim be'eretz mira. The statement that said you hold on to them for 3 months is talking about where there's adequate pasture land, right? So there's not a lot of pasture land and a lot of grazing area, so there's not that much effort for me. that's when you hold on to it for 3 months. When it said 30 days, that's talking about a situation where there's not a lot of pasture land and not a lot to graze on, in which case, again, there is more effort from me, the owner. Ultimately, again, in the case of the geese and the chicken, right, also distinction on both sides between large ones and small ones. Large ones eat a lot, and therefore, again, halacha l'maisa only have to hold on to them for 3 days. And ultimately, again, the smaller ones eat less, and therefore I have to hold on to them for a longer amount of time. Okay, bottom line, I will say, what's the takeaway? Takeaway is that halacha l'maisa, first of all, these halachas are subjective, animal specific. The idea is if the animal, here's the rule. If the animal self-sustains, you're obligated to hold on to the animal itself for a longer amount of time, right? If the animal doesn't self-sustain, you're obligated to hold on to it for a lesser amount of time. But bottom line, for all animals, there does come a certain point in time where you assess the value, could sell it, and then hold on to the money for the owner until he claims it. Good. So the Gemara says, so, v'she'ina osav ochel, tan rabbanon, v'ashevosalo, re'eh hech tishivenolo. So Rabbi say the Mishnah darshan the pasuk of Vashevo, and now the Bryce is saying the same thing. Vashevo, you're obligated to return a lost object to the owner. So the Gemara darshans that pasuk to mean re'eh hech tishivenulo. The finder has the right to figure out what is the best mechanism to return the lost object to the owner. Shelo yachil egel la'agolim, v'siach l'siachin, avza la'avzin, v'tarnagol l'tarnagolin. Now, quite literally, what that means is you shouldn't feed a calf to the calves, or ultimately, again, a young donkey to the young donkeys, a goose to the geese, or a chicken to the chickens. Meaning what? That if you find, let's say, a group of these animals, you shouldn't sell off one and use the proceeds to sustain the group. So once again, the mechanism is either, if they're self-sustaining, allow them to self-sustain for a period of time, and then valuate them, sell them, hold the money, or if they're not self-sustaining, valuate them immediately, sell them immediately, and put the money on the side for the owner. Incredible. Maia Hoffman. So we'll say the last element of the Mishnah, last aspect of the Mishnah is, after I assess and I sell, what do I do with the money? What do I do with the money? So this is a machlok. No, let me take it back. Obviously, what I'm doing with the money is, I'm holding the money until the owner comes along. He's going to have to give me a siman in the animal. So you have to remember, by the way, you have to remember the animal, right? So take some selfies before you go ahead and, right? You just have to remember the animal, right? So go ahead, and then after that, he's going to come give me this money. I'm going to give him back the money. The shayla is, I will say, while I'm holding the money, do I have rights of usage in that money? So that's machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says, yes, I have rights of usage in the money. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I do not. They're both saying that has a secondary ramification. What's the secondary ramification? Let's say something happens to the money, right? We'll see, it's stolen, it's lost. What's my obligation? So again, Rabbi Tarfon, who allows usage always comes with heightened responsibility. Absence of usage comes with diminished responsibility. So here we go. So Maia Hoffman says, Ad kan lo pligi, both say top of Chav test 29a. Ad kan lo pligi ela kishenishtam ishwan. And I will say, just to be clear, the machlokas Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, right, is only in a case where you've actually used the money. In other words, let's say, right, I found the animal is not self-sustaining, I evaluate it, I sell it, I have the money. So I will say, so the machlokas Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon about responsibility if something happens to the money is only if I've actually used it. However, let's say I never used the money. So I sold the donkey, it's worth $1,000, I put in escrow, right? So I put in an account. Nothing, or whatever. I put it, I put it under the mattress. I didn't use it. So I'm avdu pater. Everyone agrees that if something happens to the money, if it's lost, I'm pater. So this is a very interesting qualification of the machlokas. So Meir says, Leima tehevet yifter Rav Yosef. This would seem to be a refutation of Rav Yosef. What does Rav Yosef say? The itmar shomer aveda was in general. What is the status of a person who is watching a lost object? Right? So I find an object, in general, it's not even a case of selling. In general, I find an object, and now I am watching over it. What is the status of a shomer aveda? Rabba Amar ki shomer chinam. Rabba says, I am like an unpaid custodian. Now, I will say, as an unpaid custodian, what does that mean? The only thing I'm obligated for is what? Pshia, negligence. Right? Anything else I'm patur for is lost, it's stolen. The only thing I'm obligated for is pshia. Rav Yosef, I'm a kishomer sachar. Rav Yosef says, no, halacha l'maisa, you are like a paid custodian, a shomer sachar. Now, obviously, a paid custodian has a heightened level of responsibility. So, as a paid custodian, I am responsible ultimately, again, for if the object is lost. Right? I'm obligated if the object is stolen. So the Gemara says, Amalach Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef says, Bigineva va'aveda t'kuli amalo pligi d'chayis. Well, now Rav Yosef comes along and qualifies this. Rav Yosef says, the truth is, if I find, right, I found the donkey, I sold it, I have the money. Rav Yosef posits as Rav Yosef will posit as follows. He will say like this: if the money is stolen or lost, everyone agrees that I'm chayiv. I the finder, the shomer, I'm chayiv. Keep pligi. Where's the machlokes? Ba'onsin the shoel. We'll say that machlokes is what happens if it's an ones, an extenuating circumstance. Rabbi Tarfon will say, now watch this. Rabbi Tarfon savar sharu le rabbanu l'shtamushe begavayu. But see first white line. Watch. Rabbi Tarfon says, now look. When I go ahead and I sell off the donkey, and now I have the money, so the rabbis give me the right to use the money. Because I have the right to use the money, therefore what? Therefore I'm a shoel. I'm a borrower. If I'm a borrower, I will say, then what? Then really I'm chai for everything. Remember, a shoel, a borrower, has the highest level of responsibility. So because I have the right to use the money, therefore I am a shoel, therefore I'm a borrower. As a borrower, I have liability for anything and everything that happens to that money. Rabbi Akiva on the other hand says, no, I don't have the right to use the money. Because I don't have the right to use the money, therefore what? Therefore, lo havi shoel alayhu. I'm not a shoel. Because I'm not a shoel, therefore what? I don't have responsibility. They will say, now here's what's interesting. I don't have responsibility for ones. Right? I will, according to this approach, I do have responsibility for Geneva va'aveda, for if it's stolen or lost, but don't have responsibility for ones. So the Gemara says, Ihaki, if that's the case, lefichach da'amar Rabbi Akiva lamali. So we'll say, if that's the case, why is it that in the Mishnah it says, lefichach, if you lost it, you're not chayiv ba'achrayis. So the Gemara says, so if you say that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon are arguing about responsibility in the case where the object is lost or stolen, then it makes sense. Then the Mishnah makes sense. Rabbi Akiva said you can't use the money. Therefore, lefichach, if you did, im avdu einu chay b'achri yusan. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Therefore, the Mishnah says Rabbi Akiva says you can't use the money, and therefore, again, if it's lost, you're not chay b'achrayis. Because you would have thought, Shomer Sachar Havi, Kid Rav Yosef, you would have thought that someone who watches money, right? In other words, I found an object, I sold it, I now have the money. You would have thought the halacha is that I am a Shomer Sachar, and therefore I am chayiv in Geneva Va'aveda, Kamash Malon, Lefichach, Hashta da'amrit lo yishtamish bahem, Shomer Sachar lo Havi, V'lo mechayiv b'Geneva Va'aveda. So we'll say, that makes sense. That makes sense. Rabbi Akiva is saying is like this. You're not allowed to use the money. And therefore what? Because you're not allowed to use the money, you're not a shomer sachar. You're not a shomer sachar. Therefore, because you're not a shomer sachar, if the money is lost or stolen, then what's the halacha? I'm not chayiv. That makes sense. But if it's as you just said before, that everyone agrees that in Geneva and Aveda, I am chayiv, right? I am chayiv. So the Gemara says, and keep pligi the onsin the shoel, and the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon is whether or not I'm chayiv for extenuating circumstances. My lefichach the Rabbi Akiva. Then I will say Rabbi Akiva's statement in the Mishnah makes no sense. It makes no sense. To which the Gemara says, "Hachimi by the Mishnah." So we'll say if you're saying that everyone agrees that you're chayiv for Geneva v'Aveda, and the only machlokes is an onsin de shoel, an ones case, right? Because he's viewed like a borrower. Then the Mishnah should have said as follows. So Rabbi Akiva Omer lo yishtamish bohen. Rabbi Akiva should just say you're not allowed to use the money, and then I would have known va'ani yedana techivin de lo yishtamish bohen lav shoel havi. Then I would have known from the fact that Rabbi Akiva says you can't use the money. If you can't use it, then what? Then what? You're not a shoel. If you're not a shoel, then what? If you're not, in other words, I will say, obviously, if you can't use something, you're not a borrower. If you can, and if you're not a borrower, then what? You're not chayv in own sin. So the fichach Rabbi Akiva lamali. So why did Rabbi Akiva has that statement? Fichach To which the Gemara says, you're right, mishum lefichach to Rabbi Tarfon. We'll say the truth is that is only there in order to make it mishnaically symmetrical to the lefichach of Rabbi Tarfon. To which the Gemara says, lefichach Rabbi Tarfon lamali. Why do I need the lefichach of Rabbi Tarfon? So the Gemara says, halchika. What is what it means to say? Kevan deshar le rabbanan l'shtamushe begavayu havi kiman di ishtamish begavayu dami v'chaye ba'achri yusan. So Rabbi said this is very interesting. The lefichach of Rabbi Tarfon is actually coming to teach you the following lesson. Remember, Rabbi Tarfon is of the opinion that when I find the object, then I sell it because it's not self-sustaining. And therefore now I have the money. So what's the halacha? I am allowed to use the money. Now because I am allowed to use the money, therefore essentially, according to Rabbi Tarfon, I become like a shoel, like a borrower, and therefore again, halacha l'maisa, I'm chayiv for what happens to the object. So what's the lefichach? And I will say, what the Gemara is bothered by is that lefichach statement seems to be extraneous, right? Rabbi Tarfon says, you're allowed to use the money, therefore if it's lost, you're chayiv, you're responsible. That's obvious. As I will say, let's take this a step further, right? If I'm allowed to use the object, what's my status? A shoel. I'm a borrower. What's the halach with the borrower? Full responsibility for anything and everything. So if I'm allowed to use it, I'm a shoel. If I'm a shoel, of course I'm responsible for everything. Why does Rabbi Tarfon have to say lefichach im avdu chai b'achri yusan? That statement is unnecessary. So we'll say this is incredible. So the Gemara says what it teaches me is as follows. According to Rabbi Tarfon, once I, as the finder, have the right to use the money, I have responsibility even before I use the money. I was well say, watch this. I might have thought like this. Let's play this out. Okay, now here's the case in its entirety. I'm on my business. I find the donkey. I'm a good Jew. I see the donkey. I take the donkey. I try to sustain it. We try to get along. It doesn't work, right? I evaluate it. I sell it. Now I have $1,000 of donkey money sitting in my possession. I say to myself, you know what? I don't want to deal with this. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm not using this money. I'm putting it on the side. I'm putting it away. The owner will come. I remember Siman with the donkey, Shalom al Yisrael. I would have thought that because I didn't use the money, therefore what? When it comes to this money, I'm like a shomer chinam. Kamash Rabbi Tarfon says, since you have usage rights, you are a shoel on that money from the beginning, even if you never used it. That's what the lefichach means is, even if you make a conscious decision, I'm not using the money, doesn't make a difference. You are a shoel, it was incredible, right? You are a shoel on that money, since you have the right to use it, you are a shoel on that money from the beginning. That's why, lefichach, therefore, if that money is lost or something happens to that money, even though you never used it, you made the conscious decision not to use it, you're responsible for it. Incredible. That's what it says, since the rabbis gave you the right of usage on it, it says, if you've used it, incredible. I Bava avdu katani. Rabbi say, but the lashon of here is that it says avdu, that you lost it, which sounds like there was usage. So the Gemara says kidraba on the base 29b kidrab damar rabba nignevu balist mizuyin avdu shetavu sinas layam. So we'll say Rabba. We'll see this actually later on in the Gemara that Rabba explains these cases of nignevu as armed robbers, and avdu as the boat sank, and therefore there was the loss was a result of that. Okay, I'm Rabbi Shmuel halacha Rabbi Tarfon. So the Gemara says ultimately the halacha is like Rabbi Tarfon. So also remember again. So Rabbi Tarfon in the Mishnah was the one that said halacha l'maisa, when you sell the object, you have usage rights over the money, and because you have usage rights over the money, effectively you're a shoel, you're a borrower. Because also remember again, once you have usage, you can't be a shomer sacher, right? Because remember again, generally a shomer has responsibility to guard the object, doesn't really have usage. It's only a shoel who has usage. So now the Gemara says the halacha is like Rabbi Tarfon, and therefore I'm going to both say two things. Number one, you're allowed to use the money, or three things. Number one, you're allowed to use the money. Number two, that makes you effectively a shoel. Number three, as a shoel, you're chai for everything. And now I will say the kunst is going to be, once you are a shoel, you are responsible for that money, for everything that happens to the money, even if what? as you just said before, even if you choose never to actively use it. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Biyad Rachba Havele Hano Zuzi Diasmi. So the Gemara tells a story over here. This man Rachba, had money of orphans. He was responsible. This was like an apotropos. He was responsible, like the attorney for the Yisomim. See, he had money in his possession that belonged to the Yisomim. So what happened? So he came before Rabbi Yosef. So this is interesting. So this man Rachba had a question. He said, "Listen, I am responsible for safeguarding the money of the orphans. Do I have the right to use this money while I'm guarding it?" In other words, I got it. I'm assuming full responsibility. Can I invest it? Can I utilize it? In other words, again, I'm responsible for it. But in that responsibility, do I have the right to use it in the interim? So listen to this. So we learned the halacha is like Rabbi Tarfon. It's like Rabbi Tarfon. So we'll say, and that sounds like what? What does Rabbi Tarfon say in the Mishnah? You're allowed to use the money in the interim until the owner comes and claims it. So Abaye says, 1 second. So we'll say, so now this all makes a little bit more sense. Why does Rabbi Tarfon say that Allah you're allowed to use the money? Right? In other words, I find the donkey is not self-sustaining, or self-sustaining for a little while, but even if it's self-sustaining, I don't have to hold on to it forever. I assess it and I sell it, now I have the proceeds. Rabbi Tarfon says, you could use the money. Why does Rabbi Tarfon say you're allowed to use the money? Because halacha l'maisa, it will say, it's almost like, to a certain degree, like a benefit that I get because of the tircha. Right? Watching a lost object and caring for a lost object, and even after I assess it and sell it, having the responsibility to watch over someone else's money is like a big thing. It's a big thing. And again, it's not like someone, who asked me to do it. I'm taking on additional responsibility. So Rabbi Tarfon says, because you have that additional responsibility, we give you like a perk. What's the perk? What's the perk of the job of watching a lost object? You could use the money in the interim. So the Gemara says, B'dmei Aveda. They will say, now when is that? So again, now also, this is something very specific in what we call Dmei Aveda. Dmei Aveda means almost like this. I found an animal, I kept the animal for a certain amount of time, I had to get an appraisal, I had to find a buyer, I have to get the money. There's a lot involved in that. So Chazal said, with all that tircha, the benefit we give you is you have use of the money. Not yours, obviously, you have to give it back, but you have use of the money. I will say, but let's be clear about something. Let's say I find money. And I find money, remember we had the money sugya. I find money in a way, let's say tziburin, or like markalish. In other words, I find it in a way where clearly there was intentional placement, in which case I have an obligation to announce it. In that case, Rabosai, you don't have the right to use the money. Right? Why not? What's the distinction? It's very simple. In the second case, there's no tircha. There's no real effort involved. In the first case, there was tremendous tircha. So where there is tircha, again, I find the animal, sustain the animal, assess the animal, sell the animal, all this stuff. Chazal gave me the right, or Rabbi Tarfon gave me the right to utilize the money. But if you just find money, you put it on the side, you wait for the owner to claim it. The Gemara says, Vahani kimaos aveda dami. In this case of the money of the orphans of Osai, that's like finding money. And therefore, again, Rachba, you don't have the right to use it. Rav Yosef's, no. Who did they come before? Rav Yosef, sorry. So Rav Yosef says, Zil lo shafkule da ashula. So Rav Yosef apparently, who at first felt that Rachba should have the right to use the money, Rav Yosef says, essentially, they refuted me, and you don't have the right to use the money. So we'll say a very interesting distinction. This right to use found money only applies in a very specific case, where I found livestock, I sustained it for a certain amount of time, then again, I assessed it, I sold it, I have the money. Because of the tircha involved, Chazal gave me the right to utilize that money until the owner claims it. But that's only in the case of what we call Dmei Aveda. Found money, or for that matter, money, if you saw money that I'm watching, you're not allowed to go ahead and do that. So the Rambam Paskins, like this Mishnah, that Allah if you find livestock, assuming it's self-sustaining, you're obligated to go ahead and keep it for a certain amount of time. At a certain point, depending on the item, we're not going to go through all of it. At a certain point, you assess the animal, sell the animal, and now you have the money, you return the money. The Rambam paskins like Rabbi Tarfon. The halacha l'maisa, after you sell money, you have the money. The Rambam says, yesh lo reshus l'shtamish bohen. Right, you have reshus to utilize that money. So both say, so therefore what? So because I have the right to use the money, therefore what? Halacha l'maisa, I am a shoel. Because I am a shoel, the Rambam says, leficha im nemsu kigon shetarfam gayis otavu bayam chayiv l'shalim. I'm obligated to pay. I'm obligated to compensate. And he says, "V'afapi sh'lenishtamesh bohen." So we'll say, even if you didn't actually use the money, since you have reshus to use the money, you are a shal. So we'll say, so bottom line, we pass like Rabbi Tarfon, and therefore I'm going to have the right to use the money. Because I have the right to use the money, I am a shoel. And I will say, the great chiddush is, even if you never used the money, doesn't make a difference. You are a shoel. Once you are a shoel, halacha l'maisa, you are chayiv for anything and everything that happens to that money. Incredible. Mishnah. We'll say some really interesting cases here. Matzah svarim. We'll say, let's say I find a sefer. Right? I find the lost object of the Krishna sefer. And we'll say, obviously, when the Gemara talks about a sefer in this context means a scroll. I find the scroll. Matzah svarim. So kari bahen echad l'shloshim yom. So we'll say, now remember, scrolls, parchment, need to be aired out. So therefore, what do? I'm holding on to the part. I'm holding on to the scroll. I have an obligation to air it out, right? Essentially, like to roll it once every 30 days. So we'll say now remember, what's my goal? What's my obligation? You just open it up and learn from it a little bit. That's all. Learn from it a little bit. I've been any odea likros. What happens if I don't know how to learn chas v'shalom? So what's the halacha? Go along. So ultimately, again, roll it. So I'll say it's very interesting. So what do you see in the Meir? Now, this is not a chiddush. But you see from what I will say is when you find a lost object, you're obligated in the maintenance of that object. Right? So once every 30 days, you got to air out the scroll. So the best thing we'd like you to do is learn. Right? Learn from the scroll. If I don't know how to learn chas v'shalom, roll it. Avalo yilmo b'metchila. Let's listen to this. But if you do learn from it, you can't learn something new from this scroll. Now what's the concern about this? Learning something new often takes my attention. And I suppose the idea over here is I'm obligated to open up the scroll, learn from it a little bit, but just for a little bit. The problem is if it's a brand new inyan, let's say I'm learning something for the first time, so I may get very involved. And because I may get very involved, I may end up keeping the scroll open for longer than necessary. And then there's a concern ultimately again of damage. I can't learn with the chavrusa out of this scroll. I will say, why is that? Because when two people are there, what are we concerned about? Jostling of the scroll, right? And that may cause it to rip, may cause it to get damaged. Masa kisus, if I go ahead. Good. If Masa kisus, if I find an article of clothing, minara echel shloshim yom, v'shotcha litzarka. Let's say if I find the garment, so what do I do? Also, once every 30 days, you got to go ahead and shake it out, right? Or just hang it out, right? But again, it's only for the benefit of the garment. But you can't do it for your own benefit. As well, so let's say I say to myself, you know what? I found this nice snazzy cloak, right? So you know what? I happen to have a chasana that I'm going to. Happens to be the 30th day since I've had that. I got to shake it out anyway. Right? So let me just wear it to the chasana. That you can't do. That you can't do. In other words, you could shake it out, which is logical. You could shake it out. Because we'll say, by the way, this also goes back to what we saw before. Remember, the right to use a lost object only applies in a very specific case. What's the specific case? Demei aveda, right? Money from an object that was no longer self-sustaining, you can sell it off. But in any other case, you're not allowed to use the object for your own benefit at all. See, even the cloak. The cloak has to be shaken out once every 30 days or hung out once every 30 days. So you can do it for the cloak, but you can't do it in a way that benefits you. What happens if you find a gold utensil, a silver utensil? So again, you could utilize it every once in a while for the benefit of the object so that it doesn't rust. But you can't use it in a way which potentially diminishes the object itself. Sorry, that was not gold and silver. Silver and copper. So we'll say gold or glass. Don't touch it. Now we'll say the distinction between these materials is apparently gold and glass, leave it alone. Nothing's going to happen to them. You can leave it for however long, nothing's going to happen. Apparently, copper and silver, if not used, tarnish or somehow are diminished. Matzah saka kupa. So we'll say this last halach is very interesting. If you find a sack, literally a sack, or a kupa, some type of receptacle, where it is not the normal derech for me to pick up such an item. Now we'll say, now what's this case? Let's actually look at Rashi just a moment. She'ein darkol litol, davar shegenaihu sha'adam chashavhu, ve'ein darkol litol kulpo shalachnisa min achotz labayis. So let's listen to this. This last case is actually an interesting one. This is going to be a case of where you find an object, where you would not normally pick it up. I was about to say, let's say a person has a certain stature. So generally, again, he wouldn't bring in this type of object from the outside of his house to his house. Just given his personal standing. If you find an object like this, such an individual would not be obligated to pick it up to do Hashavas Haveda. Right? So we're obviously going to delve into this more. We're going to introduce this concept of what we'll call like Zakin Levein Lefi Kavodo. That if given my stature in life, it's not bakavadik of me to pick up this object. I don't normally pick it up in my house. Right? So therefore, again, I'm not obligated to return such an object. We'll see, we'll explore that a little bit later. Amr Shalom, we'll say, here we go. Hamotzi Tefillin B'Shuk. If you find a pair of tefillin in the marketplace, so what's the halacha? Some altar. Valuate it, sell it, and hold on to the money. Massive Ravina says, 1 second. Massive Svarim Karaban Echel Shloshim. No, many of them cross Golan. Ravina said, what about the Mishnah? The Mishnah said, if you find Svarim, what do? Right? You just keep it. All you need to do is what? Roll it every 30 days. Or learn from it every 30 days. Golan in, so you see, you roll it, but some demei umanichin lo amar. We'll say so. Again, by scroll, it's not like the Mishnah says, valuate it, sell it, and move on. We're just reading from it every 30 days. So why by tefillin, we'll say, sounds like by tefillin, you find it immediately, valuate it and sell it. What's the pshat? So the Gemara says, this is interesting. So Amar Abaye, tefillin bar bechavu mashkach shlichi, svarim lo shlichi. So what's very interesting, Abaye says, tefillin are readily available. So because they're readily available, the best thing you could do is just sell them, hold on to the money, put the money on the side, and that way when the owner comes around, he'll give him the money, he'll get a new pair of tefillin. Svarim are much more difficult to come by. So because of that, the obligation is to hold on to the svarim and just maintain them once every 30 days. Very interesting. Hashol Sefer Torah mechavero. Let's say if I borrow a Sefer Torah from my friend, so I'm borrowing a Sefer Torah from Reuven. So what's halacha? Hareza lo yishalenu la'acher. I am not allowed to lend that sefer to someone else. Poscho v'korebo. I'm allowed to open up the sefer and learn from it. Obilvat shlo yomo bo b'tchila. But I can't learn something new that I've never learned for the first time from it. V'lo yikra achar imo. And ultimately, again, I can't have someone else learn with me. So also it's interesting. These are the parameters of borrowing a Sefer Torah. So if you borrow a Sefer, obviously, again, I could learn from it. Right? I can't lend it to someone else. Right? I can learn from it, but I can't learn something for the first time from it, and I can't learn with a chavrusa in it. So to again, if I deposit, right? So in this case over here, I have the sefer, and I'm depositing it for safekeeping with Reuven. So what's halacha? Gololo kol shnei masar chodesh. He should roll it once a year, post chovekoribo, or open it up and learn from it once a year. In bishvilo pascho aser. But ultimately, again, if he opened it up not for the benefit of the scroll, but just for but for his own benefit, that is going to be aser. Sumcha says, Bechadash shloshim yom, with a new sefer, you should open it up once every 30 days. Biyashan shnei masar chodesh, with an older sefer once every 12 months. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer echazeh v'echazeh shnei masar chodesh. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, no, a new sefer, old sefer, the obligation for maintenance is once a year. Okay, so we'll say, there's a lot in that price, so we have to unpack that price now. And the problem also is that there are many elements of that price that seem to contradict our Mishnah. So let's go. We're now going to dissect that price we just read. Amar Mar, Hashol Sefer Torah mechavero, hareza lo yeshleim la'acher. So we'll say, what's the halacha? If I borrow a Sefer Torah, I borrow a Sefer Torah from Reuven, I can't lend it out to someone else. The Gemara says, I don't understand. My area Sefer Torah, afilu kol milina, midamar Hashem and Lakish, kanshan Rebbe, eina shol rashay lahaskir, ve'ena socher rashay lahaskir. So we'll say, first of all, 1 second. It's a general halacha. If you borrow something from someone, right, or you rent something from someone, you have no right to lend that or to rent that to someone else. It's a very important halacha, that when you borrow something, you don't have a right to go ahead and share that with someone else. That agreement is between me, or that arrangement is between me and the owner. And I will say, that's true for any object. So why are you making it sound like this is a unique halacha by Sefer Torah? I'll tell you why. So the Gemara says, Sefer Torah is shrichale, mal. So we'll say Sefer Torah is different. Why? What would you have thought? Nechale le'inish titei avid mitzvah b'mamone. I would say, Sefer Torah, if I have a Sefer Torah, I'm lending it to Reuven, I want every Yid in the world to use the Sefer Torah. Right? Because after all, again, they're learning, it's beautiful, it's fantastic. Kamash Malan, no I don't. Right? Kamash Malan, then I will say, this is my object, I'm worried about wear and tear on the object, I'm lending it to Reuven, I'm depositing it with Reuven. Reuven can use it. If Reuven wants to, Reuven needs to ask. But Stam not. So I will say, by the way, we're going to see this concept, of nechal inish titi avim tzavamone. That in general, I will say, I am happy when people perform mitzvos with my property. So we're going to see, I am happy when people perform mitzvos with my property. When ultimately, again, my property is not diminished. If, however, my property has the chance of being diminished or damaged, that's when I'm not so easy going about my property. So as we saw before, Reuven is watching the Sefer, he opens it up and he learns. So it's so pshita, that's obvious, we spoke about that before. So the Gemara says, we'll say now a case of lending it. So I lent the Sefer to Reuven, the Brisa said, Reuven is now allowed to learn from it. So of course Reuven is allowed to learn from it, we'll say, that's why I lent it to him. So the Gemara says, Sefer strichale, o bilvad shelo yilmod bo bitchila. So we'll say, no, I need the sefer. What do the sefer say? Even though I'm lending it to Reuven, right? Even though I'm lending the object to Reuven, and because I'm lending it to him, he has a right to learn from it. Even though his rights as a borrower are limited, he can't learn something for the first time from the sefer. Why? Because then we're concerned there's going to be a little bit too much wear and tear. When you learn something for the first time, you spend a lot of time on the sefer. So even as a borrower, he has that limitation. It will say, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meir with this last, or this case of Hamafkid Sefer Torah. So we'll say, so again, all we're doing now is we saw this incredible Brisa, and now we're dissecting the Brisa piece by piece. We'll see some incredible halacha l'maisa tomorrow as well. We'll say, shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.
Quick question. We said yesterday you had three regalim. You had to announce the three